Hello again. Well, here we are continuing. I'm sorry. I keep moving this around and then I think it's good. And I push the record button and then it changes everything. Okay, so like I told you yesterday, we were talking about the Compromise of 1850. So we are now moving into chapter 9. Remember we said we were a little behind of where we were supposed to be. So that's why I'm making like new videos, because the ones I made last year won't work because it's not where we are. It's not good though, right? Because the Lord is in control of every day that we have. So we are going to move on into chapter 9 now, and the Compromise of 1850. So remember, President Taylor, he became the president in 1848. Trying to remember what day. So in 1848, he became the president. Even though Zachary Taylor owned slaves, he did not believe in slavery. He felt that slavery was a real problem, and he certainly did not want it to spread. Now, you might ask, why did he own slaves and he felt it was wrong? Well, at some point in our history, and I can't remember when, so I'm not going to say like a date or whatever, some of the states actually made it illegal to free your slaves upon like your death, or to free your slaves because what was happening was a lot of slave owners were freeing their slaves. For example, George Washington put in his will that when he died, all his slaves were to be freed. And so lots of people were doing that, and so at some point they actually made it illegal for you to just wholesale free your slaves. So I don't know if that was why Taylor had slaves but did not agree with slavery, but there was a lot of people at this time in history that actually did have slaves but did not actually agree with slavery and thought it was wrong. Robert E. Lee would be one of those people as well, but for whatever reason, they could not free their slaves. All right, so since Taylor was so against slavery, he did not want it to spread to the territories or any place else in the United States. But Calhoun, John C. Calhoun, he was all for the spread of slavery because he said slaves were property, and if you move to another place, you take your property with you. So if people are moving to other states, they should be allowed to take the slaves with them and still own them. Because remember, everybody's moving west, right? You have the gold rush that had occurred in 1849, and you just have a lot of people that are looking for land. And so as they're moving, some people who own slaves are concerned that they won't be able to. So Henry Clay, remember our buddy Henry Clay, he comes up with yet another compromise. So his compromise is for California to be free, which of course they were, and that each territory gets to decide whether they're free or slave once they come into the state. He also felt that he had some provisions in the bill for recapturing runaway slaves. So before this, if a slave ran away and they were able to get to a free state, they were automatically free, and there was nothing that the slave owner could do to get them back. I mean, he could go and say, hey, I want my slave back, but most people were against slavery, so they wouldn't go find him and give him back, and he had no legal right to go get them. So it would only be if somebody was willing to give the slave back, or if the slave was willing to go back on their own. But if you went to all the trouble to escape, why would you go back, right? So he made a provision for runaway slaves that even if they got into free states, they would not be free, and they could be taken back to the South and given back to their owner by law. And if anybody tried to help them, that was going to be a problem. That's going to be called the Fugitive Slave Act later. So what happens is Clay has these three pieces to his compromise, hoping that some states will be happy with some of them and some states won't be happy with other parts, but that enough people would be happy that it would pass. But what happens before this gets to pass, a lot of people are not happy with any of it, and Henry Clay actually gets sick. and he leaves, and so a man named Stephen Douglas, remember that name, picks up the cause. And if you want to see a picture of Stephen Douglas, it is on page 215. Okay, that's what Stephen Douglas looked like. And remember that name. You'll hear it later. So Stephen Douglas picks up the fight and realizes that if he has this whole compromise together in one bill, he's never going to get it passed. So what he decides to do is he decides to split each one of these up into a separate bill. So he splits them into 5 parts. So he even takes them not just the 3, but he splits them up even to smaller parts so that he has 5 pieces, which is still everything Henry Clay wanted, but he just took it into smaller bites. Okay, it goes to something that Franklin Delano Roosevelt once said. I think it was Franklin. And I know Johnson said it, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, said if you can get the nose of the camel under the tent, before you know it, the whole camel's in the tent. So what they're saying is, yeah, we can't pass all of this because people are upset about all of it, but if we take little bites, getting the camel's nose under the tent, then we can pass the whole thing and it will be exactly what we wanted, the whole camel in the tent. Okay, so that is the philosophy that Douglas took. Remember, his name is Stephen Douglas, last name's Douglas. Okay, and he got all of it passed. Now, in the meantime, while this is all going on, Zachary Taylor, I'm going to move you because we're going over here to the notes on this side. Zachary Taylor dies, okay, in office, which means as the president, he dies. Remember, it doesn't mean that it's in his office he dies. It just means that while he's holding the office of president, he ends up dying. So he dies in office, and the way it works is if the president dies, the vice president takes over. So Vice President Millard Fillmore. I always want to combine his names and make it something totally different. Millard Fillmore is his name. Millard Fillmore, he doesn't like slavery either. He is with Taylor, which is pretty much the stance of the Whig Party. Remember, the Whigs broke off from the Democratic Republicans because they did not agree with slavery, right? Remember, we talked about that way back. And so then we have 2 new parties. Well, they have different names, which are the Democrats, which are with the slavery, and we have the Whigs, which are against the slavery. So that's where we are in history, yes? So, Millard Fillmore is against slavery too, but he is looking at all these issues. He's looking at the country. He's seeing how slavery is going to tear apart the country, how it's going to divide the country. So even though he really doesn't like slavery, his priority is to keep the country together. As you see, we're going to, again, kick the can down the road, this slavery issue. So what happens is he decides to go ahead and sign all of these bills that the Congress passed, because remember, just because the Congress passes it, the president can veto it. But President Fillmore decides that he is going to sign them all and pass them all to try to preserve the Union. He's trying to keep the country together, because slavery, as more years go by, is becoming a more and more divisive issue. That means to divide people, divisive. So slavery is becoming a greater divide between the groups of people. And Fillmore sees what's coming on the horizon, and he does not want to be responsible for dividing the country, so he decides to sign the bill. Many people are upset about this because at this time in history, a lot of the country thinks slavery is wrong. They think slavery should be abolished. They just don't seem to know how to go about doing it without A, tearing the country apart, or B, devastating the economy of the South. Because remember, we talked about that, the economy is all built on the slavery thing. And so trying to come up with a solution of how to fix that has seemed to be eluding people at this time in history. Now, some very famous runaway slaves that we're going to talk about. The first one is Henry Brown. So Henry Brown was a slave in the South, and he actually was put in a crate. They call him Henry Box Brown, and he was mailed to the North. I think it was, see, there's an Odyssey episode, and so I get them confused as to which state he got mailed to. So it's on page 216, if you're wondering. So Henry Box Brown was mailed, and it was the Society of Philadelphia, Anti-Slavery Society of Philadelphia, who was trying to help slaves escape. And they put him in a box and mailed him. A great big box. I mean, it's not like boxes we think of today. And it's more like a crate. It's like wooden. But he is in a box, yes. And he has a little bit of food, a little bit of water. And they don't know that he's like being mailed. Does that make sense? But he is being mailed. And so he arrives in Philadelphia. And when they open the box, he's a free man because now he's in a free state. So that is one of the people who escaped. And again, he had help from abolitionists. Remember, abolitionists are people who are against slavery and want it to be abolished. Abolish means get rid of. And so he was helped. Harriet Tubman, she was born a slave, and she was not treated well. She was abused by the slave owners. She was hit in the head accidentally. The owner was trying to hit somebody else, missed the person he was aiming for, and hit her instead. So that is a problem that plagues her for the rest of her life. So she'll like just go to sleep. She'll just be standing there, and all of a sudden she'll go to sleep, and then she won't wake up for hours. So it's pretty incredible to hear her story, due to the fact that, you know, falling asleep and not waking up for a long time could really be a problem for Harriet Tubman escaping. So Harriet Tubman escapes to the North, and not only does she escape to the North, but she ends up coming back into the South to help free her family, to help free friends. She ends up freeing a lot of slaves, helping them to escape. And we don't really know how many. Some people say hundreds. So Harriet Tubman, she actually got the nickname Moses, because remember, Moses brought the slaves out of Egypt, the Israelite slaves out of Egypt. So they call Harriet Tubman Moses. Harriet Tubman is able to escape on something called the Underground Railroad. Now, two things about the Underground Railroad. One, it's not underground, and two, it's not a railroad. So why do they call it the Underground Railroad? Well, first of all, they call it underground because it's secret. All the people involved in it are keep a secret. Nobody knows who they are, because in order to help the slaves get free, they need to keep everything a secret. Okay? They called it a railroad because you don't run around and say, hey, let's go on that freeing slave place. Who's the next person on the freeing slave? You know, this house, they've helped people get, you know, free from slavery. They helped them escape. So they called it a railroad. It was like code words, yeah, to keep it all a secret. So the people who helped slaves escape were called conductors, and Harriet Tubman was a conductor. She knew all of the places. They called the places that you stop stations. And she knew the houses of the people who would help escaping slaves escape. So some of them had hidden rooms, kind of like during Germany, during the Nazis, trying to get the Jewish people. Those people would have hiding places to hide the Jews. It's the same kind of idea. They were hiding as runaway slaves. So the slaves would hide out during the daytime, and then they would run at night. And it didn't mean like running. Sometimes they would be, you know, walking or whatever to go to the next place where they could rest. because in the daytime it's much easier to see you and recapture you than at night. So Harriet Tubman is responsible for saving hundreds of slaves. Harriet Tubman actually had a price on her head, just like, remember, Gladys had a price on her head. So Harriet Tubman, people were offering money for her capture because she was freeing so many slaves. Okay. And Harriet Tubman, during the Civil War, cool information. She was a spy, she was a scout, she was a nurse. She helped the Union Army during the Civil War. She knew the area well, which is why she was a scout. And she was a very famous lady. And then when she died, she gave her house to help former slaves. There was schools, So Harriet Tubman is very much blessed by God, used by God. Because remember, she still had that sleeping issue, right? So imagine if you're running with a group of people, and then all of a sudden you just fall asleep for like 3 hours. That's kind of scary, I would think, for if I was like trying to escape with her and she's like leading me and then she's like sleeping for like hours, I'd be going, I don't know what to do. So God really used her and blessed her. All right. So not all slaves that escaped were able to stay free because, again, they changed laws and things. So a man named Anthony Burns, he was in Virginia, and he was a slave. And where he worked, he was exposed to a lot of sailors. Well, he made friends out of these sailors. These sailors were his friends, yes. And they wanted to help Anthony escape. So they put him on a ship and they take him to Boston. Now, Boston is in Massachusetts, and so it is a free state. So when Anthony gets there, he's free. But again, the laws changed. So what happens is Anthony Burns's master, goes up to get him. He arrests him during May 24th. He captures him and arrests him. And a big mob in Boston attacks them. I mean, not like attacks, but surrounds them and are trying to free Anthony Burns because they don't want slavery in Boston or Massachusetts. They don't want slave owners in Boston, Massachusetts. They want to make sure Anthony Burns is allowed to be free because they don't want slavery creeping into their state and city. What happens is it's such a big issue with all these people and writing and stuff like that, that the president, who is Fillmore at the time, he sends in soldiers to guard Burns until the date of his trial. So Anthony Burns is now in custody, being guarded by military soldiers so that the mob can't get to him and free him. So what happens is he has his day in court, and the judge decides that yes, Anthony Burns is the property of the slave owner and has to be returned, which makes people in Boston and all abolitionists everywhere very, very upset. This keeps being an explosive issue. And so although Fillmore thought maybe signing these would help the country not divide, the country at this point in history is extremely divided over the issue of slavery. And those who say it is wrong, it is unbiblical, it is not okay, it's not how Christians should treat each other, it's not how people should treat each other, you can't own people, because all people are made in the image of God, and they have the right to be free, which is all guaranteed under our Constitution. You have those on that side, and then you have the ones on the other side saying, well, I need to have slaves in order to run my plantation, otherwise we'll all starve. So you have this issue of people trying to make change while others are trying to stay the same. So what happens to poor Anthony Burns is his master takes him back, treats him very badly, probably beats him up and stuff, but treats him very badly is what the book says. And because he's upset because A, he ran away, B, he caused this big commotion in Boston. So he's not really, the favorite guy. So what happens is a bunch of people get together in Boston, and they all raise money, and eventually they raise enough money to buy Anthony's freedom. So they go down, they buy his freedom, they bring him back up. So finally Anthony Burns does get his freedom, but it's a lot longer process than anybody anticipated. Okay. Again, slavery, divisive issue during this time. So we're going to read the two views together. So please turn to page 219 in your book. 219. Okay. Two views. Stories like Burns's made people in the free states angry. They wanted to keep slavery out of their states. Many of them thought that slavery was wrong. But the Compromise of 1850 said runaway slaves found in free states had to be returned. Slaves owners could claim slaves as property. These stories made people in the slave states angry as well. Slave owners believed slaves were their property. The slave owners thought a slave stole himself when he ran away. Think about that. They thought he was stealing himself. Crazy, right? How can you steal yourself? But that's what they thought. Crazy, crazy. If people tried to stop a slave owner from getting his slave back, the slave owner thought they were stealing from him. Okay? The problem of runaway slaves divided the country. This problem raised an important question. Should people be allowed to own other people as property? All right? And that is where we're going to stop today. So please do the pages, and I will see you later. Bye.